Under the ink-black sky of the Pacific, December 1943, the night was supposed to belong to Japan. For 2 years, the Imperial Navy had ruled the darkness, striking unseen and vanishing before dawn. Their torpedo boats cut through moonlit waves like sharks, their pilots trained to fly low and fast, trusting the ocean's black mirror to hide them. But tonight, something was wrong. From the deck of the destroyer Amatsukase, lookouts strained their eyes toward the horizon. There was no moon, no visible enemy. And yet, in the distance, American guns were already turning toward them. Shells erupted through the void, finding targets no human eye could see. Imperial Navy Night Action Log, December 1943. Within minutes, chaos reigned. Japanese destroyers tried evasive maneuvers, their searchlights stabbing the darkness. The beams illuminated death itself, tracers already inbound, arcs of fire guided by invisible precision. One officer shouted, "How can they see us?" before a 5-inch shell tore through the bridge. U.S. Navy Action Report, Solomon Islands, 1943. The Americans had eyes in the night, something beyond human, something mechanical. For Japan's elite night battle fleet, the same force that had once humiliated Allied navies off Guadalcanal. This was unthinkable. Their doctrine depended on darkness, on surprise, and on human skill and instinct honed by endless drills. Yet now, the advantage of night was evaporating before their eyes. Ships that should have been ghosts were being hunted, tracked, and destroyed by an unseen power. Combined Fleet Staff Diary, January 1944. That power was radar. The U.S. Navy had turned the electromagnetic spectrum into a weapon, and for the first time in history, machines were seeing what men could not. But the technology that now seemed miraculous had roots buried deep in the 1930s, in the quiet hum of laboratories and the restless minds of engineers. In Massachusetts, researchers at MIT's radiation laboratory, the RAD Lab, worked under tight secrecy. Physicist Alfred Loomis had bankrolled early experiments on microwave detection before the war. By 1942, under Dr. Luis Alvarez and Robert Page, they were producing compact shipborne radar units capable of detecting aircraft and ships miles away, even through rain, smoke, or darkness. U.S. Naval Research Laboratory Technical Record, 1942. The Japanese had experimented with their own systems, primitive Type 21 and Type 22 air search radars, but their sets were few, unreliable, and poorly integrated with ship fire control systems. By contrast, the U.S. Navy's SG and SC radar sets operated at 3 GHz and 100 MHz, respectively, giving a clear, rotating sweep of the sea. The SG could detect a destroyer-sized target over 15 miles away before the enemy even knew it was there. Bureau of Ships Report, October 1943, but to the sailors on the Pacific Front, radar felt like sorcery. On the bridge of the cruiser Helena, operators stared into their glowing scopes, green waves of light pulsing rhythmically, dots flickering in and out. Those blips were ships, the enemy, positions unseen, yet perfectly plotted. We could track them like ghosts on glass, one crewman recalled decades later. Oral History Archive, USS Helena, 1957. As the technology spread across the fleet, night engagements began to shift. The Japanese, once masters of stealth, found themselves ambushed. At Kolombangara, off the Solomon Islands in July 1943, the U.S. task force picked up approaching vessels long before contact. The destroyer Nicholas turned first, guns primed by radar direction. When the first Japanese searchlight cut through the dark, American gunners were already firing, shells guided not by eyes, but by coordinates from a scope below deck. U.S. Navy War Diary, July 1943. Within minutes, Japanese formations dissolved into confusion. The Americans no longer feared the night. They owned it. Still, few outside the radar rooms understood how this new sense worked. Even some officers distrusted it, preferring their binoculars. "Can't fight a war staring at ghosts," one captain grumbled. But the results were undeniable. Battles once decided by luck or moonlight now unfolded like chess. Unseen moves calculated in electrical pulses, echoing across the Pacific. For Japan, the implications were catastrophic. Their naval doctrine, refined since Tsushima in 1905, rested on achieving surprise through night torpedo attacks. Now, that doctrine was being dismantled in real time. Imperial Navy strategists struggled to understand. Reports from frontline captains spoke of invisible detection, enemy foresight, and unseen weapons of perception. Imperial Japanese Navy Intelligence Bulletin, January 1944. Many dismissed these accounts as excuses until the losses became impossible to ignore. Radar didn't just alter tactics. It shattered morale. Japanese sailors, once confident in their night vision training, now whispered about American witches or eyes of metal. Field Diary. Aegean Destroyer Division 15. The fear was psychological as much as physical. The night, once their ally, had turned traitor. By late 1943, the Allies were no longer groping in the dark. From the Solomons to the Bismarck Sea, radar networks coordinated air cover, naval convoys, and search and destroy missions with mathematical precision. Each victory built upon unseen lines of radio energy, arcs of science forged in secrecy and tested in fire. In the labs back home, engineers like George C. Southworth of Bell Labs refined waveguides, while women technicians in factories assembled delicate magnetrons by hand. They would never see the battles their work transformed, but their fingerprints were on every glowing screen. Bell Laboratories Production Report, 1943, for every Japanese vessel sunk under cover of night. Another piece of a terrible realization fell into place. The enemy's strength was not just in ships or men, but in the invisible realm, in waves, circuits, and frequencies that defied tradition. In Tokyo, naval officers demanded answers. How did they see us before we saw them? One asked, pounding the table. The reply came hesitantly. Because they no longer fight with eyes. Post-war interrogation transcript, Tokyo, 1946. And yet, radar was still in its infancy. The Americans had only begun to integrate it into their strategies, using it not just for detection, but also for coordination, precision, and command. Entire fleets could now act as one organism, guided by unseen information. For Japan, it was like fighting a ghost with a blindfold on. The night seas of the Pacific were changing forever. Smoke, water, and darkness no longer hid anything. Machines were learning to see, and men were learning to trust them. The burning hulks of once proud destroyers drifted in the black waves. The surviving Japanese sailors stared into the empty dark and asked the same question. What had they unleashed? Because this was only the beginning. Radar would not remain a secret advantage for long. In the months ahead, it would evolve, growing smaller, faster, and deadlier, shaping not just the next battle but the entire war's outcome. And soon, it would find its ultimate test in a confrontation that would decide the fate of the Pacific itself. Naval Communications Report, February 1944. Under the humid night of June 19, 1944, the Philippine Sea churned with distant thunder. Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet moved under strict radio silence, its decks stacked with hundreds of carrier aircraft. The Imperial Navy believed they were unseen, poised to strike what they thought was a vulnerable American invasion fleet near the Marianas. But hundreds of miles away, aboard the USS Enterprise, radar operators were already watching them. Faint echoes, blips moving west to east, told a story no human eye could yet confirm. Large formation incoming. Bearing 270, an operator reported. Within seconds, Admiral Mark Mitcher's task force came alive. Fighters were scrambled and anti-aircraft batteries loaded. The Americans saw their enemy hours before the Japanese even knew they'd been found. U.S. Navy Radar Operations Log, June 1944. This was the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the largest carrier engagement in history and the moment when radar's silent advantage became a weapon of total dominance. The Japanese came in confident, their doctrine built on ambush and surprise. Yet they were flying into a storm they could neither see nor comprehend. Radar aboard U.S. carriers and /APS, 4 airborne units, and SK, 2 shipborne arrays, extended America's vision over 150 miles of sky. Japanese pilots, guided by outdated reconnaissance, were flying blind. Bureau of Aeronautics Technical Summary, 1944. To understand the sheer technological gap, one must look into the heart of the machines themselves. The U.S. Navy's SG surface search radar operated in the 3-centimeter wavelength range, powered by the revolutionary cavity magnetron, a British invention perfected at the MIT Radiation Laboratory. Compact, precise, and remarkably resistant to interference, these magnetrons allowed radar to lock onto targets with unprecedented clarity. Engineers like WWII, Bowen, and Dr. Robert Page refined these devices to survive salt air, vibration, and shock. The result: a rotating dish mounted high on masts that swept the horizon every 3 seconds, translating invisible radio echoes into luminous blips on cathode ray screens. Technical Manual TM9 to 294, 1943. By contrast, Japanese radar lagged by nearly 3 years. Their Type 21 and Type 22 sets used meter-band frequencies, coarse, slow, and incapable of accurate fire control. Operators struggled to interpret cluttered signals, their screens often flooded by reflections from waves or rain. More critically, they lacked the integrated plotting systems the Americans had mastered. U.S. Combat Information Centers, CICs, combined radar feeds, radio intercepts, and navigation charts into a single operational picture. In these dimly lit rooms, filled with cigarette smoke and the steady hum of electronics, decisions were made in seconds. Office of Naval Intelligence Report, 1945. Aboard the Enterprise, Lieutenant J.G. Charles Thayer watched as the radar plots converged. 60 no, 80 bogies inbound, he muttered. The numbers grew. When the wave reached over 200 contacts, he turned to his superior. Sir, it's the entire Japanese air arm. Mitchell nodded grimly. The order went out. Launch all fighters. Combat Air Group 15 Diary. June 1944. High above the Pacific. American F-6F Hellcats rose into the early dawn, guided solely by radar vectors. Controllers aboard the carriers fed them bearing, altitude, and distance data over secure channels. Turn right to heading 250. Bandits at 12 o'clock, 30 miles. The pilots saw nothing, but they trusted the voice from the dark. Minutes later, they broke through clouds, and sunlight flashed off enemy wings. The first Japanese formation flew straight into their sights. Action Report, USS Enterprise, June 19, 1944. The results were devastating. Within hours, the Imperial Navy lost over 300 aircraft, most without ever sighting an American ship. The U.S. radar network had orchestrated the defense like a conductor leading an orchestra. Each wave of Japanese attackers was met, intercepted, and destroyed before they could reach their targets. American gunners, aided by radar-directed fire control systems like the Mark 37 and the Ford Instrument Company's Rangekeepers, turned the sky into a wall of steel. Bureau of Ordnance Report, 1944. From his flagship Taiho, Admiral Ozawa could only watch as his air groups disappeared from radar screens, never returning. We no longer own the night, or the day, he said quietly. Dramatized composite based on post-war interrogations, for the first time in naval history. Total situational awareness, radar-linked, data-driven, and electronically coordinated, had replaced human instinct as the deciding factor of victory. Behind every radar pulse lay thousands of hours of labor from men and women who would never see the ocean. In Chicago's Western Electric plants, female technicians wound copper coils thinner than a hair, assembling magnetrons by hand under microscopes. At the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, engineers tested antennas in wind tunnels and salt chambers, ensuring they would survive Pacific gales. Their precision engineering gave the fleet its new eyes. Western Electric Manufacturing Report, 1943. Japanese engineers tried desperately to catch up. The Yokosuka Naval Arsenal developed the Type 13 air search radar and Type 22 Mod 4 surface unit, but shortages of high-purity copper and vacuum tubes crippled production. Even when sets were installed, operators lacked training, and integration with fire control was rudimentary. Captured Technical Intelligence Summary, 1945. American engineers, by contrast, were rotating new designs every 6 months. The Navy's Bureau of Ships and MIT Rad Lab functioned like a wartime Silicon Valley, invention and deployment happening at breakneck speed. By mid-1944. Radar wasn't just detecting, it was predicting. Linked to analog computers, it allowed real-time interception calculations. At Saipan, radar stations directed Marine Corps night fighters onto Japanese bombers before they reached the beaches. At sea, radar-guided naval gunfire illuminated coastlines with mathematical precision. Marine Air Defense Command Report. July 1944. The Japanese, accustomed to the fog of war, now found themselves fighting an enemy that could see through it. Even morale shifted under the new reality. American sailors began to trust their machines as comrades. Radar operators, once dismissed as scope watchers, became essential crew. Their calm voices guided pilots home through storms, smoke, and chaos. If you could hear that voice, you knew you weren't alone, one Hellcat pilot later said. Naval Aviator Oral History, 1950. For the Japanese, every sortie into the dark became a nightmare. Invisible detection, unseen death, the psychological imbalance grew. Japanese after-action reports spoke of enemy premonition and of fleets maneuvering as though warned by spirits. Dramatized composite, but this was not mysticism, it was mathematics. Every radar sweep added another thread to a digital web of war. Information had become the new high ground. By the end of the Philippine Sea Battle, Japan had lost 3 carriers and over 600 aircraft. The Americans called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Radar had turned what should have been an even fight into an execution. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The Japanese fleet was crippled, blind, and deaf, while the U.S. Navy refined its electronic doctrine further stilled in the weeks that followed. Engineers aboard fleet tenders installed new radar sets across destroyers and escort carriers. The Navy's Bureau of Ships sent mobile calibration units to ensure every emitter was tuned to peak efficiency. Bureau of Ships calibration record, August 1944. Each radar pulse, each sweep of the green scope, was a heartbeat in a new kind of warfare. But beneath the triumph, there was unease. Some officers wondered if reliance on machines would dull human instinct. Will we still fight when the screen goes dark? One admiral mused. Personal correspondence, Pacific Fleet Archives, 1945. Yet in war, advantage means survival, and radar had become the Navy's sixth sense. Still, as American confidence grew, another challenge loomed. The Japanese, though battered, were not finished. Their scientists and commanders would soon turn desperation into innovation, seeking to strike back in unexpected ways by turning technology itself into a weapon of terror. And as the U.S. fleet pushed toward the home islands, it would soon face a new threat, one radar could see coming but perhaps not stop in time. Naval Intelligence Briefing. October 1944. By early 1945, the Pacific burned from end to end. From Leyte to Okinawa, the Imperial Japanese Navy was broken, its once proud carrier fleets reduced to scattered remnants. Yet the war had entered a new, more desperate phase, one that tested even the unseen dominance of American radar. The empire that had once stalked the night was now launching waves of kamikaze attacks, pilots who did not intend to return. And once again, the battle between man and machine would be decided in those invisible wavelengths of energy rippling through the skies. U.S. Navy Operational Report, March 1945. As the fleet closed on Okinawa, radar picket ships fanned out like a living wall across the ocean. Each vessel carried the latest SK-2 air search radar, its parabolic dish turning ceaselessly under the gray Pacific sky. Operators sat in darkened compartments, eyes fixed on glowing scopes. Every flicker could mean a life-or-death decision. We watched the blips appear, dozens at once, recalled Ensign Harold Klein of the USS Bush. They came in waves, straight toward us. Like meteors. Personal Diary, USS Bush. 1945. The kamikazes came low and fast, often beneath radar coverage, using the curvature of the Earth as their shield. Yet American engineers had already begun to adapt. Scientists at the Naval Research Laboratory modified radar frequencies to counter low-altitude approaches. Ships were networked through new Combat Information Centers, CICs, where officers integrated radar plots, radio intercepts, and visual sightings in real time. The CIC was the nerve center of the fleet, a place where technology and instinct fused into one. Naval Research Laboratory Report, 1945. These rooms were dim, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the drone of oscillators. Young operators, many barely 20, traced moving dots with grease pencils on plotting boards. Above them, the voice of a controller called out, calm and precise. Bandits bearing 180. Closing fast. Anti-aircraft guns rotated automatically, guided by radar-directed fire control systems like the Mark 57. Turrets that once relied on lookouts and guesswork now moved with mathematical certainty. Fire Control Division Brief, 1945. Still, radar could not feel fear or fatigue. The human element endured. On April 6, 1945, the USS Bush and USS Colquhoun bore the brunt of the first mass kamikaze assault at Okinawa. Over 350 aircraft, tracked and reported by radar, dove from every direction. Gunners fired until barrels glowed red. Radar scopes filled with chaos, echoes upon echoes, until the operators could barely tell friend from foe. It looked like rain on the screen, one said later. Then we realized it was planes. After-action report, Destroyer Division 48, 1945. Despite the technology, both ships were lost. Yet their radar warnings saved the fleet behind them. Every second of detection, every transmitted bearing, bought time. For every destroyer sunk, a dozen carriers survived. Radar's true weapon was not destruction, it was foresight. U.S. Strategic Analysis, Okinawa Campaign, 1946. Behind this edge stood armies of engineers and factory workers across the American mainland. In Buffalo, technicians at the Curtiss-Wright plants tested microwave generators. In New Jersey, Bell Labs refined duplexers that allowed simultaneous transmission and reception on the same antenna, cutting detection time by half. Bell Laboratories Progress Memo, 1944. Women technicians at General Electric wired complex circuits by hand, soldering thousands of connections daily. These invisible soldiers gave the fleet its second sight. WWII 1945. Radar production had become an industrial miracle. Over 50,000 units of various types were delivered to the U.S. Armed Forces, airborne, seaborne, and land-based. The Signal Corps deployed SCR-270 and SCR-584 sets across Pacific Islands, creating radar picket chains stretching hundreds of miles. The ocean itself became a single vast detection grid. Army Signal Corps Logistics Report, 1945. The Japanese, meanwhile, faced a cruel irony. Their own engineers had developed radar systems, like the Type 13, capable of detecting incoming B-29 bombers over Kyushu. But they lacked the fuel, the parts, and the trained operators to use them effectively. The Imperial Command's obsession with offense had blinded it to the science of survival. Captured Japanese Technical Evaluation, 1946. As one post-war Japanese engineer reflected, "We built swords, and they built eyes." Post-war interrogation. Tokyo University Archives, 1947. Radar's influence extended beyond the battlefield. It reshaped command, communication, and psychology. Officers no longer commanded from decks, they commanded from screens. The war had become an information contest. Data was power, and whoever mastered it controlled the fight. U.S. Naval Tactical Doctrine Review, 1945. Psychological Warfare, 2. Shifted. For Japanese crews, radar became a ghostly tormentor, something they could not see, hear, or touch, but always felt looming. Pilots reported being tracked before even starting our dives. Fear of unseen detection drained their morale faster than gunfire. For the Americans, confidence soared. The fleet felt omniscient, untouchable. But with that came a subtle arrogance, a belief that machines had made them invincible. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, the radar rooms fell silent. Yet the legacy of their hum, the flicker of those green screens, would echo for decades. The same radar principles that guided shells and aircraft now guided peace. Engineers from the MIT Radiation Laboratory carried their wartime experience into civilian projects, weather tracking, air traffic control, and the birth of microwave communication. MIT Radiation Laboratory Transition Report, 1946.